part 2 of gender. And according to Judaism, remember that Essentials is here to get our Jewish head on straight. We're all brainwashed by Western society. And not that there isn't wisdom in Western society. I mean, there's tons of wisdom, but it's not our wisdom. And whatever is true anyway in Western society, you will find it in Torah. I promise you, any truism you found in Western Civ, yeah, it's going to be right there in Torah. The problem is it's whatever. It's not us. Okay, we're all brothers. We're all brothers and sisters, and the more someone has steeped their teabag in Torah, the more to trust them, and the less someone steeped their teabag in Torah, the more you can certainly listen to what people have to say, but you're getting foreign advice. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. We're trying to put our heads on straight. And right now we're studying gender. We'll see how many parts it'll go. Yesterday was part 1. It was the first installment of how does Judaism look at gender. And we did a bit of a comparative study by understanding how in the last 60 years since the feminist movement began, beginning with women's lib, moving to feminism, how that has, what kind of impacts that have had. And we had discussed that it's come to the point where women might show up more as the men, and men might show up more as the women, which is an important thing to note. First of all, for women, because women are naturally attracted to men, and men are naturally attracted to women. And we had mentioned one thing is that men today, the more womanly they become, the more attracted they are to men, because women like men. And so if that woman attribute's going to want more, it will veer towards men. And the others for women, they still want a man, but as they get more manly, they get more attracted to a man who's not so strong on the man side, and which is fine for them because they're enjoying calling the shots. There's some power there. There's some it's nice for them. They feel the power, and the husband's happy to abdicate to their calling the shots, and it's just less responsibility on the man. And I think today's men generally aren't so into responsibility. So if she's taking it, why should he? And if she's paying the bills and working and handling all the balance sheet, and why not? Let her do it. But the problem really shows up later. As a rabbi, I'm doing a lot of counseling, and I would say the biggest theme that we get in counseling couples when the woman turns around 37, 38 to 40, right around that time, many women, they're ready to trade in their husbands, which is really a nasty feeling for them. They feel terribly guilty about it, but they're looking around already, at other men and really manly men, like they look for the manly men, and they start looking around a bit, and they're ready to trade in a bit. And so I always tell them that she's like, well, I want a man in my life. And I'm like, well, you killed him about 20 years ago. You already killed him off 20 years ago when you married him. Now you want to trade him in. And what's her obvious job? She needs to build him up. Her job's to build him up, and so that she has him. She has to now make him a man and let him be that man, and just give it to him. Give him the mandate to be the man in the house. And but that's not an easy process. It takes time, and a lot of coaching for men. Today, coaching for men is so important in marriage, and you can start when you're single. Start when you're single, and it's a good thing to do. Anyway, so back to gender. So in the Torah, the women are always placed on a super, super high level. It's just propaganda garbage when we think, whenever you hear people foaming at the mouth about like the Jewish world putting down the women, yeah, you got to just know that is garbage. It's biblically garbage. It's rabbinically garbage. And it's certainly, if anyone who knows the observant community knows that it's garbage. It's just propaganda. It's propaganda to make observant Jews look lame, okay, and look archaic. But there's nothing of the sort exists of women being put down in the observant community. There are issues. There are certainly issues. For example, in Jewish law, a woman cannot be divorced unless the husband gives her a get. So that gives a husband tremendous leverage to keep her locked into a marriage that's disintegrated 10 years ago. So she can get locked in, and she's stuck. She's stuck. So there are certainly issues in Judaism that can be, that are certainly big topics for feminist Jews to champion and make it, make the Orthodox world look terrible. There are such issues. But in the actual normative, happy Jewish home, the woman is like tremendously honored, tremendously respected by the husband, by the children, by the male children as well. The woman is put on like the highest level. But let's start biblically. On a biblical level, we learned that it was the Jewish women that in their merit we were actually redeemed from Egypt. It was in their merit. We're taught that there are 50 possible levels of impurity, and if we hit the 50th level, we would not have even been redeemed from Egypt. It would have been all bets are off, because God had to keep his bet with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would take us out. But if we hit the 50th level, deal is over. It's a deal breaker if we hit that 50th level. And we got to 49. And the biggest issue that we're involved in, which is the biggest deal breaker in Judaism, was idolatry. And yet we see that the women of Egypt did not fall into the idolatrous practices of Egypt. The women did not fall into that. It was also the sexual impropriety of Egypt was like the worst. It was called the nakedness of the earth. Ervas haaretz, the nakedness of the earth. Egypt was like terrible. When they depict Egypt in our books and stuff, they're showing like the revised versions by putting clothing on people. Okay, it was really, really bad, and there was no such thing of sanctity of marriage or anything like that. The Jews kept that for the most part, but the women kept it for sure for the most part, to the point of where the Torah records the only child born to a Jewish woman that was inseminated by an Egyptian man. There was only one. It's 210 years of us living amongst the Egyptians. There was only one case, and we know because the Torah recorded the one case. We were redeemed from Egypt because of the Jewish women, because they didn't stoop all the way, and so we got redeemed because of them. Our Redeemer himself was redeemed because of Miriam. Our Redeemer himself was not killed. He almost was killed, but because of his wife. He was almost killed by God for not doing a circumcision on his son on his way down to Egypt. His wife, Zipporah, does the circumcision. And Moses is saved. Our Redeemer is saved by a woman, his wife. He was only really, born. It depends how you look at several midrashic texts, but he was only born because of Miriam, his sister, who convinced her father to get back together with his wife. Moses' father's name was Amram, and Amram had divorced Miriam for reasons we're not going to discuss right now. Amram divorced his wife. It's only because of Miriam they got back together. But you'll just see every single time. At the Torah giving at Mount Sinai, 40 days later, the Jews sin at the golden calf. This is the worst day in Jewish history. Not a single woman bowed down to that calf. Later, when the Jews send spies up to Israel, just to do a reconnaissance mission before we go in there to fight the 7 Canaanite nations, seems like a normal thing to do, but it also very much seems like an idea that was brought about by men, and it was. And the 12 men who went to Israel, 10 men came back with a horrible report of these crazy Canaanite monsters that we could never beat. And once again, the Jewish women did not believe the report. And so, but that was our 40 years. That report and the Jews believing that report was our 40 years in the desert. We were supposed to just go straight into Israel. But we wound up in the desert for 40 years because of that report. Jewish women didn't do it. Why 40 years? So everyone in that generation could die. Everyone who believed the report. But the women didn't have to die. Any woman who was still alive got to come into Israel. Meaning at the end of the 40 years, women who lived long lives, because 40 was already pretty long. But if a woman lived to 50 or 60, she got to come in. But the men had to die. No one who believed that report belongs in Israel. No one who lacks faith belongs in Israel. Because this country is crazy, man. You got to be crazy to live in this country without faith. I mean, this place is wild. You really, sometimes you just, I marvel at like secular Israelis. But the truth is they do have faith. They really do. They do. You meet a secular Israeli, maybe on the outside you don't notice it immediately, but you just squeeze them a bit and the faith starts coming out. They're like grapes. A little squeeze and there it is. But it really is true. It comes right out. What was one of our great leaders of Israel, a secular leader, I think it was Ben Gurion, I think he said, any Israeli who doesn't have faith is not a realist. One modern example is at one point, Israel was being run by a woman named Devorah. A woman named Devorah. She ran Israel. And we had this like massive war on our hands. And the battle that was called for was going to be at Har Tavor. Have you ever seen the Har Tavor, the belly button mountain in the Jezreel Valley? It's on their way up north on the 65 highway. Anyway, that's where the battle was going to be. And so she tells the commander of the army, she says, you got to get up there and fight it. You know what he says to her? He says, I'm not fighting that without you. I need you to be there. And she said something. She said, you want this war to go down in the name of a woman when you're the commander of the Israeli army? And he's like, yes. I'm only fighting it if you're there. And she's like, fine, I'll be there. But it's going to go down in my name. And he's like, I don't care. I don't want to die. And Devorah went up to Mount Tabor, and she led the war against Sisera and his army, and the Jews just totally vanquished them and protected the land of Israel once again through Devorah. The Jewish women are over and over and over again are the cause of Jewish continuity, not only because they're the ones who produce Jewish children, and men cannot do that. A Jewish man cannot produce Jewish children. It's only a Jewish woman can produce Jewish children. But not only are they the ones who produce them, they're the ones who sustain them. Whatever your wife will be is what your children will be. If she's really into Torah, your children are going to be into Torah. It's an amazing thing. My dad always believed in God. He even made Kiddush Friday nights. We could do whatever we wanted before or after Kiddush. There was no rules. We didn't separate dishes or anything. We didn't know what we were doing. But Kiddush Friday night, my dad, he always had a Yiddish feeling inside. Because his father was straight from the old country. His father was, with the European accent and the Yiddish sayings here and there and everywhere. And he was from that old world. My mother, on the other hand, was the daughter of a communist, atheistic, intellectual line of so what do you think I was growing up? Into the Yiddishkeit or into the communist, atheistic headspace? What do you say? Communist, atheistic. That was where my mom was at. It's wherever your mom's at is generally where your head's at, because they create the culture of the home. They create everything there. Now, there's something very interesting about Jewish women, and that is that they are genetically predisposed to thrash their husbands and sons. They're genetically predisposed to thrash. It's a predisposition. It's a genetic predisposition. And I meet Jewish men who just can't take it. So I tell, and they're observant now. They became observant. But what they went through growing up was beyond what they can deal with. And I have a lesson, by the way, to all Jewish women, and that is to always reward your husband for coming home. And if he needs a good thrashing because he came home 2 hours late, let him eat something first. Let him feel safe in his own home. Because if you thrash him at the threshold of the doorway, what time is he coming home tomorrow night? The next night? After a while, he's going to be calling you from another city. So you always reward a husband for coming home, and you let him eat something, then you give it to him. This is one of the proofs. We can prove this, and the way you prove it is just with all you do is take a Jewish girl who was raised with no Jewish values and see if she thrashes her husband. And the answer is they thrash. and they thrash their kids. And any of you who were raised by a secular Jewish mom knows you got thrashed. Yeah, and it's unique. It's really unique. Tell you a story. I was surfing in Malibu once, not Surfrider Beach. I was surfing a Misto Reef. That's above Zuma Beach. That's a spot that very few people knew about. There's no way to see it from the highway, and you park in a certain spot, walk down the cliffs on a certain trail. And anyway, I go down there. I surfed a lot alone growing up. Oftentimes, whatever. People talk a lot, but they don't actually get out there, so I always got out there. So I'm out there. There's one other guy surfing. The waves are like 6 to 8 feet, perfect. It's like tropical conditions, amazing. And we're surfing these waves, and we're freaking out that it's just the two of us and how awesome it is. But after my last wave, I said, you know what? I think this guy's an MOT. MOT is a member of the tribe. So I paddle back out, and I ask him, I said, are you an MOT? And what did he ask me? What's an MOT? I said, are you a member of the tribe? You know, the tribe. And he's like, I am actually Jewish. And I said, that's amazing. Like, on top of all of this, like, perfect day, you know, we're both here as Jews out here surfing. It's awesome. You know, and he says, yeah, it's cool, you know. He wasn't as excited as me. And it's funny, he never even brought it up, because I'm like obviously the surfing rabbi, you know. So anyway, he didn't say anything, but then he did. And so I said, you know, after the next wave, when you surf, by the way, your conversations are broken up by waves all the time, so you kind of know no conversation is more important than the next wave. So you take a wave, and then you go say a few more words, and then you take a wave, and you say a few more. So after my next wave, I said, so did you marry a Jew? He says, hell no. I was shocked. I was like, what do you mean, hell no? He says, you think I'm going to put up with that? It's like, my wife appreciates when I come home. This is where I got this, everything I'm saying. It was from him. She appreciates I bring home money. She appreciates it. You know, and she, you know, and goes on and on. She uses it carefully. You know, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just listening. I'm going, my goodness, like, they're not like that in Jerusalem. He's like, so what are they like in Jerusalem? So I explained to him how careful my wife is with my money, and like how thrifty she is, and how whatever. And he's like, they're not like that in Encino. Encino's a city in, you know, part of LA. And that's, I think, where the term Jewish American princess came up. Yeah. It's Encino. I think it comes from there, actually. Valley Girl. The Valley Girl. You heard the song The Valley Girl? Yeah, that was from Encino. Anyway, so whatever, that ended. Another story. I'm visiting Los Angeles, and I'm there to teach for a few months at UCLA. But I sold my mountain bike in Israel before I flew, because it was time to upgrade. I ride every bike I get for 5 years, and then I trade it in and get a new one. So it's time to trade in. I got the money for the bike that I bought here, that I sold here. I get to LA, immediately I put out in the network, you know, Rabbi Glaser is looking for a bike. So now that's going all over LA. And it finally hits the editor of Mountain Biking magazine in Northridge, in a city up in the valley. That was where the big LA earthquake was, also the capital of pornography production. And anyway, so it hits this guy's house, a guy named Chris Ito, okay? He's selling a bike, not just any bike. He's selling the bike that was the cover story of his magazine that he fell in love with so much that he traded the bike for free advertisement to the company he bought it from. And he's selling it brand new. He never even got to ride it, besides, you know, tooling around on it a bit during the test. But he just fell in love with the bike from the whole article they did on it, got the bike to trade for advertisement. Anyway, I've already got the bike in my car. I've handed him $2,000, which is, at that point, was half the price of the bike. That bike would now be like $7,000. But anyway, I got the bike in my car. I've handed him the $2,000. I'm so excited because I just sold my bike for $2,000 in Israel. And I am about to take off when he says, Rabbi, can I just ask you a question? I said, yeah, no problem. He says, listen, I'm really suffering. I'm sorry, what's the matter? He says, you see my house over there? I look at his house. He said, yeah. I say, you see that little side sticking out over there? And I said, yeah, it looks like a renovation. He says, yeah, I renovated. He says, but I haven't finished it because I ran out of money to finish it. I said, okay, God should bless you with money to finish it. He says, no, Rabbi, I wasn't looking for a blessing. The issue is that I'm married to a Jewish woman. And I'm just like, uh-oh. Anyway, you can imagine the story ended with, she said, it's me or the bike. Yeah, meaning finish the renovation. How dare you bring a new bike in here when that renovation isn't finished? And he's like, this is just one aspect of it. I'm not even telling you the rest. I don't know what's going to happen with my marriage. I don't know what's going on here. And now this dream bike is sitting in your car. And I'm paying for a renovation I didn't even want. And you understand? Like, he's in nightmare land now. He bit off more than he could chew marrying a Jew. Okay? And so at that point, I was just shaking my head, and I was like, yeah, you're in trouble. Normally I can offer advice. But in this case, I don't know what you're going to do. So anyway, I took off. I was very happy to get that bike. It's very cool. Yeah, it's one of the few times I ever benefited from an intermarriage. But here's the amazing thing, is I get thrashed too. And I'm a rabbi. I'm a Hasidic rabbi. It's just genetically set up that way. I'm like a hardcore off-road mountain biker, as we've already described. I also surf internationally, and I'm still surfing all the time. Every time there's waves, I'm out there. Yeah. So about 9 months ago, I was on my way out of the house Sunday morning, grabbed my bike, I'm heading out, and my wife's like, woo, 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 pull it over, please. And I'm like, she's like, can you just pull over for a second? I'm like, Rrr. And, and I could tell it's coming. So I just put on my helmet, and I was like, what's up, sweetheart? She's like, can you sit down, please? I'm like, okay, we could sit. What'd I do? I mean, what's up? And she was like, the way you and Avrami, that's my son, who at the time was 15, the way the two of you kind of do these giant power slides coming in for mountain biking about 10 minutes before candlelighting on Friday afternoon, when we've got the table set from Thursday, and we've been dressed for Shabbat since noon, and you guys are covered in mud, and you would think when you came in the house, you were going straight into the shower. No, straight to the fridge. Crack open the fridge, out comes microbrew, pouring into frosty mugs, toasting almost straight through the glasses. You both pound a half-liter beer each, high five, jump in the shower with 5 minutes left before Shabbos. And then you're both watching the clock, twisting your pants. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, good Shabbos. And we're like, Shabbos, yeah. Okay, we're going to shul. See you later, sweetheart. And out we go again. And you think there's no drinking age in Israel, so you can party with your sons and your daughters. My entire family drinks beer. It's unbelievable. Even down to my baby. Everybody drinks. You cannot leave beer around an infant, I learned. But what was her point? Her point was, Shabbos is the center of our week. It's what we're living for. We're living for Shabbos. We're living for this time where God's presence comes booming into our house. We prepare for that. We want to be ready for that. If you had an important guest coming home, and I'm giving you a word-for-word speech right now. If you had an important guest coming over, you wouldn't have shown up covered in mud, 10 minutes before and drinking a half-liter of beer before you even showered. What kind of lesson are you giving our kids? Why don't you just stop? What you're basically saying is Shabbos ends the stuff you love to do. Shabbos is this limit where you got to stop doing what you love. That's the kind of lesson you're giving the kids. Why don't you just stop an hour before? Get everything done an hour before, and why don't you show our family that Shabbos is important to you? And I was just like, tss. And she's absolutely right. She's always right. It says in Genesis, Lo tov adam lios levado. It's not good for a man to be alone. It's a very strange sentence. It doesn't say anything about women. It says men. It's not good for a man to be alone. A man left to his own devices is trouble. If it wasn't for queens, men would have destroyed the world years ago. It was the queen that says, honey, why don't we just count our money now and stop conquering more countries, A man needs to have a woman, and a Jewish man needs a Jewish woman. Why? And the answer is, well, there's 613 answers why. Meaning a Gentile man needs a woman, but a Jewish man has to have a Jewish woman. Because their setup to thrash is not to thrash randomly like that surfer was afraid of, so he married a Gentile. The Jewish man needs a Jewish woman to thrash because if a Jewish woman is schooled in Torah values in her upbringing, or at least later she played catch-up at a women's yeshiva as an adult. But when she gets that understanding, which she gets, as you remember from our last part, she gets it real quickly. She absorbs it very quickly because female and male work very well, and because God's called in the masculine, not because God has genitalia, as we said, but because God's causing creation into existence, and the causer of flow is the masculine, and the receiver of flow is feminine. And because they get that so quickly, they just get God, and they get Shabbos. Shabbos is hard for men. It's another big emasculator, where we have to take our frickin' fingers off that Crackberry or iPhone and just drop it and stop trying to pretend we do something. God gives men 6 days a week to pretend they're actually doing something. But come Shabbos, he's like, let's just stop pretending. No one's going to remember you 100 years from now. So give up the vain desire to make your mark on every lamppost and start being real with the fact that you're a created being and I am the creator. And give me a full day just to spend with you. Women will spend a full week with God, but men, God's like, 1 day's enough. I'll just take 1 day, please. Just 1 day. But for us, putting down that iPhone's we're just it's and then it's separation issues and stuff. And you expect us to fall asleep? How am I supposed to fall asleep? The only position I can sleep in is this. That's it. It's just a state of being going into Shabbos. And men we don't want to just be. We want to do. Make that mark on the world. And so all of these things, when it comes to men and the mitzvahs of tefillin, the mitzvah of tzitzis, the mitzvah of minyan that we have to pray in a group, and Shabbat, and all the other mitzvahs that are specific to men are all there to help, so to speak, to feminize us. For this reason, it seeps in a lot. Feminism's had a big impact on Jewish men and women and families. You see, in the last 200 years, the ultra-Orthodox world in Israel, called the Haredi world, have been on this. The protocol is to stay as separate and uninfluenced as possible by Western civilization, because Judaism is not Western. Yet we've been living amongst Westerners. And so what they've done with the whole black attitude movement is to stay as separate as possible. But especially when it comes to your mindset, to make sure your mindset stays Jewish and does not go Western. But when it came to feminism, that was like, we're so susceptible. Why? Number one, Judaism's already set up to feminize us. Judaism's set up for us to become more androgynous, to be more connected to our feminine side, to emasculate us, if you will, to realize there's a God, and to get into that role of being a receiver, because men so naturally want to assert and not receive. So because Judaism's already set up for that for men, and Jewish women are predisposed to thrash, so feminism just like shoots into even the most observant circles. So as separate as you may think the black hatitude world is, on this subject, it just comes right in. And it really is not good for marriage. It's really not good for marriage. It's a dangerous thing. I had recently a story of a guy pulled up to next to me in his car. I was on my way, guess where I was going with my 15-year-old son? We're on our way mountain biking. And this was going to be a whole day trip. And it was amazing. I ran into him, actually, because I forgot my wallet at home, which meant I didn't have my driver's license, which he could not help me with. But 100 shekels helped a lot, because we needed a little money for snacks and beer and stuff after we rode. And anyway, so he pulled up next to me, and I was like, oh, Hashem, I know somebody. You got 100 shekels? He's like, yeah, no problem. Gives me 100 shekels. And I said, you look a little sad. What's up? He says, well, the dream's over. I said, what dream? He says, my Aliyah dream. I said, what are you talking about? Like your whole life, like all you wanted to do was move from, he's from the West Coast, and a Hasidic man from a Hasidic family, move from the West Coast and make Aliyah. Like, this is your dream. He says, my wife said time's up. I'm like, yeah, but you're the husband. And he says, not in this case. Hasidic Jew, Yiddish-speaking Hasidic Jew. Not in this case. Time's up. We're moving to Lakewood. I'm like, Lakewood? That's like a nightmare for you. A guy from LA does not want to move to Lakewood. Okay? So it's like, it's not just that they're moving to America, they're moving to Lakewood. You know, and the guy's like, and I said, well, didn't you speak to your Rabbi? And he's like, yeah, I did. What did he say? Listen to what he said. He said, this is word for word, he says, move to Lakewood, but try to come back. Can I explain what that means? See, what's happened at this point in Jewish history is the Rebbes realize there's no man there. Because you got to realize when a Rebbe gives a bracha, gives a blessing, and says, yeah, go this way, like do this. Go with what he says or she says. Let's say they're trying to decide between them which way to go. So whoever he decides, that person now, it's nice you got a blessing, but who's got to follow through with the orders? The person who got the blessing. So why was the blessing to leave Israel? Because who was going to follow through? See, if he blessed them to stay, who was not going to follow through? Because the Rebbe's not going to live with them day in and day out from now on. He lives with her. He would have to live every day following through as the man who led his family to the promised land, to Israel. But the Rebbe had no one to work with. And so he has to go with her. The Rebbe had to go with her. And this is wild stuff. I mean, this is like directly against Jewish law. Because Jewish law says if one of the two wants to leave Israel, you can go or you can just say goodbye. It's just Jewish law. That if one of the two wants to leave the country, the land of the Holy Land, so, you can force her or him to stay. Or they can go, but goodbye. And no ketubah. I mean, if a girl wants to leave Israel, the man says, and it's a deal breaker, she leaves, and she doesn't get anything from the ketubah. The ketubah is her prenups, in case something goes wrong. There's no ketubah for leaving Israel. You want to hear something crazy? In the same part of the Talmud, it says that if the husband wants to move to Jerusalem, and she doesn't, Same scenario. And there's all vice versa too. If he wants to leave Israel and she doesn't, so he has to give the money from the ketubah to her and leave. You understand? She gets her ketubah. And if she wants to move to Jerusalem and he doesn't, and for her this is a deal breaker, she moves to Jerusalem, gets the ketubah, and she gets all the money. It's 2 years of sustenance. It's a lot of money. A lot of money. Ketubah is a very big amount of money. It's 2 years of livelihood. She gets the ketubah, and he's stuck in Netanya, looking for a new wife. By the way, no one should misunderstand the Torah does not prescribe like divorce because someone wants to move somewhere else. I myself would tell a couple to leave Israel before divorce. You understand? It's just that our sages are hardcore Zionists, and they're bringing down like this is the way. Remember your Jewish head set, like your head should be on straight. They're telling us like if you really had your head on straight, you'd understand the laws that I just shared. You get that? Like they are hardcore Zionists. One of our sages, when he was moving to Israel, one of the sages, they know all the Torah by heart, everything, the entire oral law, everything. When he moved to Israel, he fasted 84 fasts, something like that. He fasted 84 fasts to forget every single ounce of Torah that he learned in the diaspora, so that the Torah he learned in Israel would be pure. That's how Zionistic they are. You want to forget all his Torah. And you can imagine any Torah you learn, you don't want to lose it. He wanted full blank slate. Like, let me learn the Torah of Israel. I don't want to remember any Torah I learned outside of Israel. Think how far away we are from such ideas. And that's the way they were. They were hardcore Zionists. They make Herzl look like Satmar. And I strongly suggest any Jew who's into Talmud study and stuff, who keeps Torah, who keeps Shabbat, who keeps kosher, that they stop with all their nonsense views of Zionism and modern state of Israel and stuff. Just get rid of all that stuff and start letting our sages tell us how we should feel about the land of Israel. I'm sure there's many brilliant charismatic leaders who've had negative things to say in the last 100, 200 years about the land of Israel who were leading diaspora Jewry, but and I all due respect to them. But you can't have someone living in our century directly conflicting with the sages of the Talmud. They certainly wouldn't do it in Jewish law. So why would they do it in terms of Zionism? Because there was no one more Zionistic in all of history than our sages. I want to share with you something really fascinating. Remember that God is called the masculine because he's causing flow of creation, and creation is known in the feminine. I did an investigation. I wanted to see what happens when a boy is born with feminine attributes. You ever met a man who's like really a woman just with a male body? Yeah. You ever met men like that? They exist. Like, I don't know what the statistics are, but it's a genetic thing. Purely genetic. And I don't know what it is. It might be 1 in 200 boys. I don't know how often a boy is born that way. But there are boys like that. I certainly have had them as students. I had one guy from England. He only wore tight pink designer shirts with sleeves that went to here, like on an angle, and really tight, like painted on, like red Levi jeans, like tight pants, and he was so funny, and everything was with his hands, and like he was so hysterical, and his hair was always gelled and like just perfect, and I mean everything besides makeup, but like the most hysterical guy. And he was a very close student of mine, so when I'd go around to talks, I had to give talks, and I'm like giving talks in Tel Aviv and giving talks, so he would often jump in the car and ride with me, and we would go down to Tel Aviv, and there's music playing in the background, lively music, it's a singles event or something, but everyone's just drinking cocktails and stuff. He's dancing He's like dancing, like in a most random place, like flamboyantly dancing to the music, like really into it. And like, the people whose event this, who like were very careful who came. Like the guest list was all like executives, and they come up to me and they're like, Rabbi, someone told us that he came in here with you. And I'm just like, I've never seen him before. Just kidding. I owned it. I said, listen, I'm sorry. And they're like, where did you pick that up? I mean, it's just kind of a strange traveling partner you got there. And I thought, listen to this. He's one of 11 kids. All his siblings are in shtreimels, full fur. The round like ring of fire flying around the heads on Shabbat. All his siblings are Hasidic men and women, and this is just how he was born. He's an expert in Rambam, an amazing guy to learn with. Completely and totally heterosexual. Crazy about girls. So much so he's almost become one himself. Yeah? He's crazy about girls. He had no concept of same-sex attraction at all. Because he was raised in a world that was a Hasidic world of London, Stamford Hill, and he had no concept of same-sex attraction. So that really blew me away, so I decided to do an experiment. And my experiment was, I'm going to go into Mea Shearim, to a shul that is like the most untouched place on earth. It would be like going into the Amazon and finding a civilization that like never met a Westerner. I went into Mea Shearim, to a place that just would have no concept of homosexuality, where they still have fully arranged marriages at a very young age. So every boy is engaged by like 17, 18, married by 19, 20. Totally arranged marriages. No such thing as homosexuality, a purely heterosexual community. What happens to the boys who are born women? Because they have about 800 men there, so I get to find them. It can't be that hard. So I went and found them. And boy, was I shocked in my study of what happens to these guys when they're raised in that world. I was shocked, and I'm still shocked. Ready for this? They are fast-tracked into leadership. They are the ones who lead the prayers for high holidays because they connect the most. And they cause the whole synagogue to like crack. Because the whole point of the leader of davening on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is to have you lose your resolve. Because all year round we've been taking the crown off God and putting it on our own head. I think anytime you do something wrong, what did you just do with God's crown? You just took it off and you put it on your head. The whole job of Rosh Hashanah is take it off your head and put it on God's head, which means you gotta crack, you gotta break the resolve of the congregants. That's the job of a rabbi, and especially the prayer leader on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And who is it? It's them. Not only them, there's a lot of prayers. There's prayers, service after prayer service on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. There's a lot of prayers. So as soon as one guy would finish his long session, the next guy came up, and I was like, it's another one. Because I had been tracking them. I wanted to know what they were all about. All the way through the end, like from the beginning of Rosh Hashanah to the end of Yom Kippur, it was only them who led. And at that point, I decided I got to turn my attention to the Rebbe of the entire group, the actual Grand Master Rabbi. Who is that guy? And I went and started studying into him. And guess what? Another one. Spiritual leaders. They are spiritual leaders. Completely and totally heterosexual. I mean, they didn't have much of a choice. They had zero influence from our society. They were absolutely fine in their marriages, happy in their marriage. I checked out a lot about their marriages too. I even showed up at a couple of Shabbos tables because I'm a really good reader of couples. Fine. Plenty of kids, so it definitely worked. And they all had multiple kids. And fast-tracked into being the prayer leaders, the leaders of the connectors of God and man. Very interesting. An interesting thing. What an insight that was. So what I've been sharing so far, it's a little bit complicated. It's going to be hard for you guys maybe to get your heads around it, and maybe for a few days it'll settle in. But we're trying to understand, and I think we'll end with this part, meaning yesterday was part A, today was part B. I think we'll end with that and move back into more Kabbalistic stuff. But to try to get our heads around this understanding of men and women in Judaism, what is the woman all about, and what's her role as the continuity of the family, creating the culture in the house so that there's generations of Jews forever from her. And how they're the ones who have been involved with our redemption, and as our sages say, just as we got out of Egypt because of them, we're gonna hit the times of Mashiach, the end of days, also in the merit of the Jewish women. It's only in their merit, we'll get there. And this concept that it's not good for a man to be alone, that a man needs a Jewish woman, otherwise he'll fall down on the job. It's just the fact is many men are sent out of their house all the time, thrown out of their own house to go to minyan. Because the wife, if a man's not going to pray, a Jewish woman's like, she can't live with herself. If he doesn't leave the house to pray, she's eating her heart out. It means she's blowing it. And so it's so important for us men, because us men, we don't want to go pray in a prayer group. It's emasculating. We don't like it. It's uncomfortable to go pray in a minyan. But our wives can't live with themselves if we don't, and we need to marry them so that they make sure we do. It's the Jewish women that keep a Jewish man straight and on the path of this charge of Sinai. It's not easy to be Jewish. It gets a lot easier if you marry a Jewish woman who's been trained in Judaism, because she'll keep you straight. She keeps you on the path, the right way. And we also learned that the specific mitzvahs that men do, that women don't have to do, is because the whole point is connection with God. And if we have to do extra mitzvahs, that tells you that women who don't have to do those mitzvahs are connected naturally. We have those mitzvahs, us men have those mitzvahs in order to connect us. How? Because those mitzvahs strap us down, they subjugate us, they put us in receiving mode so that we can receive connection. So we can develop that feminine side of us so that there can be connection with God. And the last thing we studied a bit was just to be careful. To be very careful that we keep our minds as purely Jewish as possible. To make sure that the home is a home where the roles of the man and the woman are not shifted because of the high susceptibility of the woman being the power of the home and the man being a wimp. It makes a girl very insecure later. It makes her very insecure later. They want a man. They may not think they do, but they do. And they certainly will later. They certainly will later. After enough diapers and laundry and like all the things that they might be involved in for 20 years straight. After a while, all the nursing, all the pregnancy, all the births, after a while, their feminine instinct starts kicking in. And female wants male, and she wants a man. And so we have to be really careful to not let that stuff seep in, because what a woman wants more than anything else is to have a man. And a man means leader. He's going to guide the family. The man is the compass for the family. He's the guide to take you out of the forest. It's not the woman's job. These days, women will take that job. And it doesn't look like they're taking it reluctantly. It looks like they're grabbing at it. But in the end, they will not be happy. And they do not feel secure. That's our job. We have to have the compass. And that's a matter of training and coaching. Today, the best thing is coaching, and very few men even know how to coach a man towards manhood. But it's something we all have to get, or else it's real problems. Shalom, everybody.